"You don't belong here." An old man, the young soldier's voice was cold, dismissive. But the old man didn't flinch. Could a simple broom hide a hero's past? He simply lowered his gaze, adjusted the broom in his hands, and stepped back like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The morning air was still when the gates opened. A black SUV rolled to a halt, tires crunching softly on the cracked pavement. Out stepped a general, his uniform heavy with medals that caught the first light of dawn. He froze, his eyes locking on the old man, and with a voice worn by years of memory, he whispered, "Captain Carter, is that really you?" And the truth about the quiet man with the broom began to unfold. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning at Fort Lincoln started like any other. I could feel the quiet pulse of the base waking up, the soft hum of trucks, the murmur of boots across cracked concrete. It was a rhythm I was just getting used to, only 3 months into my first posting here, and I was still trying to find my place in all the ordered noise. Every morning, we fell in for roll call, checked gear, checked orders. And every morning there was one figure who didn't fit the pattern. He stood just outside the yellow security line, broom in hand. His name was James Carter, but no one said it out loud. He wasn't supposed to be there, not really, not in uniform, not in formation. He was just the old man who swept the sidewalk by the east gate. I'd see him most mornings, moving slow and steady, never crossing that line, like he knew exactly how far he could go. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another fixture of the base, the worn chain link fence, the cracked sidewalk, and the old man with the broom. But there was something about the way he moved that drew my eye. Not rushed, not random. Each sweep of the broom was precise, almost ritualistic, as if he was clearing more than just dirt. Most of the guys ignored him. Some would nod out of habit, more than respect. Others didn't even glance up, too caught up in the day's task to notice an old man in a frayed canvas jacket. But I noticed. His eyes told me he didn't belong on the outside. They were steady, clear, blue even in the early light, not lost, not unsure. They held the kind of focus I'd only seen in the senior NCOs, men who had spent their lives under orders, who understood the weight of silence. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, I lingered at the gate longer than usual. The air was cold, my breath rising in pale streams. I watched Carter work, his broom whispering across the concrete. He paused, leaning on the handle, and for a moment, he slipped a small photograph from his coat pocket. It was a brief glimpse, a flash of worn edges and faded faces. 8 young men standing together in front of a battered helicopter. I couldn't see the details from where I stood, but I saw the way Carter's fingers traced the edge of the photo like he was remembering every name, every face. His shoulders tightened just for a second, then he tucked it away and went back to sweeping. That's when I started to understand. This wasn't just a chore for him, it was a ritual, a quiet vow he kept each morning. Even if no one else saw it, I tried asking around. Casually at first, no one knew much. Private Long said he'd seen the old man there since he arrived 2 years ago. Corporal Hayes just shrugged. Probably just some retiree, he said, harmless enough. But harmless didn't feel like the right word, not when I'd seen the way Carter's back straightened during the morning flag raising, not when I'd seen how his eyes never left the colors as they climbed the pole. Could a forgotten captain rewrite his legacy? A few days later, word came down from Colonel Mark Lawson. He was new, strict by the book. He didn't like the idea of civilians hovering near the fence, even if they were just sweeping leaves. Orders were orders, he said, and the MPs were to make sure those orders were followed. I was standing by the guard post when they approached Carter. 2 MPs, all clipped words and polite firmness. "Sir, you'll need to move away from the gate," one of them said. Carter looked up calm as ever. "I've been cleaning here for years," he said softly. "I know, sir," the MP replied, his voice steady but apologetic, "but new orders are in place. Civilians can't be this close anymore." There was no argument in Carter's face, no protest. He just nodded once, leaned his broom against the fence, and bent to pick up his bucket. His movements were slow, deliberate, the same way he swept. No hurry, no resentment, just the quiet grace of a man who knew how to follow orders, even when they weren't given to him. But as he reached for an old satchel lying beside the bench, something snagged. The zipper caught on a splintered edge of the wood. A small metal box tumbled out, clattering against the concrete with a sharp ringing sound. The lid popped open on impact. The MPs froze. I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat. Inside the box, I saw a silver star dulled by time, but unmistakable. Beside it, that same photograph I'd seen in his hand days before. 8 men, a helicopter in flames behind them, caught in a moment that looked both triumphant and haunted. For a moment, no one spoke. The MPs shifted, glancing at each other, unsure how to proceed. Carter didn't move to pick it up right away. He just stood there, eyes on that silver star, a quiet weight in the lines of his face. Then he knelt, gathered the box with slow, careful fingers, and closed the lid. When he stood, his eyes met mine for the first time. In that look, I saw it all, not the details, not yet, but the truth of it. This was no wandering old man, no harmless retiree. This was someone who had carried the weight of service long after his name was crossed out of the Army's Records, someone who had never stopped standing watch, even when no one was looking. The MPs let him go with a quiet nod. Rules were rules, but there was something in the air now, a shift, a question. As Carter walked away, broom balanced on his shoulder. I couldn't look away because in that silent exchange, I realized something simple and undeniable. James Carter was more than a man with a broom, he was a chapter of our history still waiting to be read. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glint of that silver star, the faded faces in that photograph. It felt like a puzzle missing too many pieces, and I needed to see the whole picture. The next morning, I found myself at the small base library before dawn. Most of the guys never bothered with the place, a few shelves of dusty binders, old training manuals, and personnel files no one had touched in years, but I had to know more, not because of orders, but because something inside me said this mattered. I started slow, flipping through deployment logs from the 1970s. It was like looking through a window into another world, names and dates, pages worn thin at the corners, and then I saw it, Captain James Carter, Special Recon Unit, presumed Kia Operation Thunderline, 1977. 3 lines of cold military record that told me everything and nothing all at once. I read it over and over, memorizing every word. Missing in action, nobody recovered, presumed killed in action. It didn't say where he went after that. Didn't say why he ended up sweeping our sidewalks all these years later, but it was enough to make my heart pound. I spent the next few days in that quiet corner of the library, tracing every scrap of his name I could find. Thunderline had been deep in Southeast Asia, an extraction mission gone bad. 7 men pulled out alive, their commander never came home, except he did. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not at first. The guys would have laughed, said I was reading too much into an old man's life, but every morning, I saw Carter at the gate, sweeping like a man who still believed in orders, even if no one else did, and every morning, my conviction grew. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Someone else must have seen the medals, or maybe the MPs let something slip. Suddenly, Carter wasn't just the old guy with the broom anymore, he was a question mark, a mystery in plain sight. The younger soldiers started to look at him differently, not openly, no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud, but I saw the way their eyes followed him when he walked by, the way conversations trailed off whenever he paused near the fence, respecting curiosity, tangled up in the same quiet breath. One evening after chow, I found myself alone in the barracks with Corporal Hayes. He was older than me, steadier, the kind of guy who always knew more than he let on. You ever notice Carter doesn't look away during the flag raising? I asked him. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Most of us look, but he sees, he said, then he shook his head. Whatever he's carrying, it's bigger than any of us. Those words stuck with me, they felt true. Every morning I watched Carter stand there, broom at his side, eyes locked on that flag, not just looking, seeing, like the flag was a promise he'd made long before any of us were even born. I decided to dig deeper. One night, after most of the base had settled into the usual rhythms of laughter and card games and quiet snoring, I slipped back into the library. I pulled file after file, chasing fragments of a story no one else seemed to remember. I found old photographs of Thunderline, blurry shots of a jungle landing zone, half-burned maps, casualty reports that read like unfinished eulogies, and in all of it, there was always that name, Captain James Carter, the man who never came home, except he did. And no one had ever asked why. I started to feel a quiet anger simmering beneath the surface. How could someone like him just vanish from the records? How could he be left to sweep sidewalks while the rest of us went about our days without a second thought? It felt wrong, and I knew I couldn't let it stay that way. At the same time, something else was happening. Colonel Mark Lawson had heard the rumors, too. He didn't like questions he didn't have answers for. His face was a mask of calm in the morning briefings, but there was a tension in his voice I hadn't heard before. I caught snippets in the half-finished conversations cut off when I walked by. Lawson's ordering a review of all MIA files. Old man Carter, you think he's really the same guy? The rumors were growing roots, digging deep into the quiet soil of the base. One morning, I watched as Colonel Lawson himself paused at the gate. He stood there just for a moment, watching Carter sweep, then he turned away, his jaw tight, and walked off without a word. I knew then that the questions weren't going away, they were only getting louder. For me, there was no more doubt. I decided to write it down, a single page in my battered notebook, each line careful, deliberate. Captain James Carter, Thunderline, missing, not forgotten. I didn't know what I'd do with those words yet, but I knew I had to keep them safe. Each day after that, I saw Carter a little differently, not just as a man with a broom, but as a silent sentinel, a piece of living history, still standing watch when everyone else had stopped. And each day I felt my own sense of duty sharpened, because I realized that some debts don't end with discharge papers or medals. Some debts live in the quiet acts of those who keep the memory alive, even when the world has moved on. I didn't tell anyone else what I was doing, not yet. This was bigger than barracks gossip or idle talk. This was about respect, about making sure a man who had given everything wasn't left in the shadows any longer. As the days passed, I saw more and more soldiers pausing when they passed Carter. Not many words, just small nods, quiet glances, a silent recognition of something they couldn't name. but felt in their bones, and in those small moments, I felt hope that maybe we hadn't forgotten what it meant to stand for something even when no one was watching. The whispers had grown into something more by the end of the week. There was a hush that followed Carter wherever he went. A quiet ripple that even the strict lines of the morning briefings couldn't contain. I could feel it in the air each morning. As if everyone was waiting for something they couldn't name. It wasn't long before the news reached beyond Fort Lincoln. General Robert Harmon, retired but still a legend in every story told over mess hall coffee, had heard the rumors. They said he had known Carter back in the jungles of Southeast Asia, that he'd carried the memory of that man who saved him all these years. I didn't believe it at first. General Harmon was a name that belonged to history books and dusty plaques, not to the cracked sidewalks outside the East Gate. But that afternoon, just as the sun slipped behind the low buildings, I saw the truth for myself. A black SUV rolled through the side gate, its engine humming low and steady. No military convoy, no flashing lights, just the weight of something that didn't need an announcement. The air seemed to still around it, conversations pausing mid-sentence as it came to a stop near the old command building. I was standing with a few other privates when the passenger door opened. And there he was, General Robert Harmon. He stepped out slowly, his green dress uniform sharp against the dusty earth. Medals lined his chest, a lifetime of service pinned in neat rows that caught the late afternoon light. He walked with a slight limp, but there was nothing hesitant in his stride. He didn't look left or right, didn't nod to the officers who stiffened to attention. His eyes were locked on the far end of the yard on Carter. The old man was there as always, broom in hand, sweeping a quiet arc of dust from the edge of the gate. He didn't seem to notice the SUV, didn't turn at the hush that had fallen over the square. But when the general drew closer, he paused, his broom stilled, the bristles resting against the concrete. He looked up, and in that moment, the years seemed to fold in on themselves. General Harmon came to a stop a few feet away. He removed his cap, holding it to his chest in a gesture that spoke louder than any words. For a moment, no one moved. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Captain Carter, the general said, his voice low and steady, but rough at the edges like a man speaking through decades of memory. You saved my life. I thought you died with the rest. Carter stood a little straighter, his eyes clear and calm. I didn't die, he said softly. Not all of us did. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Around me, the young soldiers shifted, eyes wide, no one daring to speak. This was something none of us had ever seen. A general saluting a man with a broom, and then General Harmon did just that. He stepped back, feet together, and brought his hand up in a formal salute, slow, deliberate, full of the kind of respect that doesn't come from rank, but from shared blood and memory. Carter met his eyes and returned the gesture, his hand steady despite the years. It was quiet in the yard. Even the flag above us seemed to pause in the gentle breeze. I felt the weight of that silence settle deep in my chest. The general lowered his hand and spoke again, his voice carrying just enough to reach the small circle that had formed around them. He was captured during Operation Thunderline, Harmon said, turning so his words met every pair of eyes. They thought he was gone. No body, no record, just a name crossed off a list. He paused and I saw the lines in his face deepen. But he didn't die. He survived 2 years in enemy hands, stripped of his name, his uniform, everything but the memory of who he was. Harmon looked back at Carter, his voice almost reverent, and when he came home, there was no place left for him, no file, no flag, no welcome, so he made his own place right here. I swallowed hard, feeling the truth of those words settle into the cracks of my understanding. Carter had never stopped serving, even when no one gave him orders. He'd kept the quiet watch. General Harmon's eyes grew bright with something that looked like tears. His voice dropped, thick with memory. Sir, he said, and his voice cracked just a little. Now it's my turn to bring you home. Carter shook his head slowly, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. There's no need, General, he said. I never left. I just wanted to see the flag raised every morning. That's enough for me. Those words landed like a quiet benediction around us. The small crowd of soldiers and civilians stood still as if the ground itself had shifted beneath our feet. I saw heads bow, hands flex at their sides. The soft intake of breath that comes when you realize you're standing in the presence of something sacred. Colonel Lawson stepped forward, his face pale, the authority in his bearing cracked by the weight of what he was seeing. He looked at Carter, then at the general, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Finally, he nodded once, slow and deep. We'll make it right, he said quietly. No more shadows. The general reached out then, resting a hand on Carter's shoulder, and in that small human gesture, I saw decades of silence dissolve, not in a roar of applause or the echo of trumpets, but in the soft, certain weight of recognition. I stood there, heart pounding, and realized this wasn't about medals or rank. It wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about honoring a man who had never stopped living his promise to stand watch, even when no one was looking. In that moment, I understood that this was more than a story of a missing captain. It was the story of what it means to belong to something bigger than yourself, to find purpose in the quiet spaces, even when the world forgets. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and the shadows stretched long across the yard, I knew I would carry this moment with me for the rest of my life, because in the simple, silent exchange between a general and a man with a broom, I saw the soul of what we all serve, the duty that never fades. In the days that followed, the quiet square at Fort Lincoln felt different. There was no ceremony at first, no brass bands or polished speeches, just a quiet understanding that settled into the bones of the base, a truth that didn't need to be shouted to be felt. The army moved quickly once the general's word was given. Old records were pulled from dusty file cabinets. A name once marked presumed Kia was now etched in clean, firm lines: Captain James Carter, Special Recon Unit, honorably discharged with full back pay and benefits. They tried to give him everything he had earned: a new uniform, a place in the veterans' quarters, a chest of medals that sparkled in the morning light, but Carter only shook his head, his quiet smile unwavering. "I don't need it," he said, his voice as calm as the dawn. "I only want to raise the flag each morning, that's all I've ever needed." It was a request so simple it caught everyone off guard, but in that simplicity, there was a kind of grace that no regulation could deny. Colonel Lawson gave his blessing, his voice low with something like reverence. "If that's your wish, Captain Carter, then it will be done." And so it was each morning at Fort Lincoln. Just before the sun kissed the tops of the mountains, Carter would step forward, the flag folded under one arm, the broom in his other hand. No bugle call, no orders barked over a loudspeaker, just the steady, deliberate rhythm of a man who knew exactly what mattered. At first, it was just a few of us who watched. I'd stand at the edge of the square, my breath steaming in the cold air, heart beating in time with the quiet rustle of the flag as it rose. Then slowly others joined, young recruits with sleep-heavy eyes, old veterans who carried their own memories in every line of their faces. I remember one morning when a group of children from town came to watch. They huddled together by the fence, their small hands gripping the cold metal, eyes wide and solemn. No one told them to be quiet, no one had to, they just stood there learning with every breath that respect isn't something you're ordered to give, it's something you offer because it's the right thing to do. Over time, the base seemed to shift around that simple ritual. The morning rush slowed just enough to let the moment breathe. Even the young soldiers, the ones who used to laugh too loud in the mess, found themselves standing a little straighter when Carter walked by. I watched it happen day after day, the way Carter would pause for a heartbeat, eyes on the flag, his hand steady as he raised it into the soft light of dawn. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. In that silence, there was a kind of peace I'd never seen before. One afternoon, I found myself sitting with Carter on a bench near the motor pool. He was resting the broom across his knees, the sun warm on his weathered skin. "You ever think about what it all means?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, those clear blue eyes steady. "It means we remember," he said simply. "It means we don't forget who we are." I carried those words with me because in them I saw the heart of what it meant to serve, not the medals or the rank, but the promise to stand watch, no matter how small the post. Carter kept that promise until the very end. When he passed away 5 years later, there was no grand funeral, no parades or news cameras, just a soft morning sky and the low murmur of voices gathered in respect. We held a simple ceremony at the base, the same folding chairs we used for holiday briefings, the same flag Carter had raised every morning. 7 flags were lifted that day, not just at Fort Lincoln, but at 7 other bases across the country. A final salute to the man who had taught us all what quiet honor looked like. I remember standing there watching the flag climb the pole one last time. The air was still, the world holding its breath in the quiet. I felt the weight of every morning Carter had stood in that same spot, broom in hand, eyes lifted, heart steady. Afterward, there were no speeches, no medals pinned to chests, just a line of soldiers and civilians who stepped forward one by one to lay a hand on the cool metal of the flagpole, a silent promise that we wouldn't let his memory slip away. In the months that followed, the base kept the ritual alive. A young private barely out of basic took Carter's place each morning. The children still came, their small faces turned to the flag, and every time I stood there, I felt my spine straighten, my breath steady, because I knew that some legacies don't need to be written in orders or etched in stone, they live in the way we choose to show up again and again. I still think about Carter sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn. I see the way he held that broom like a staff, the way he watched the flag climb the sky. I see the lines of his face, the calm in his eyes, the steady weight of a life lived in service. He didn't need the medals they tried to give back, he didn't need a title or a speech or a monument, he only needed to know that someone was watching, that someone understood what it meant to stand your ground, even when no one was looking. As I finished telling this story, I know one thing for sure: Carter didn't need our praise, he didn't need our thanks, he just needed someone to see, and I promise you, we did. We saw it all. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.